You think modern cooking shortcuts save you time and money? Think again. Our grandparents mastered kitchen techniques that stretched every dollar, preserved every scrap, and created meals from almost nothing. Let's dig into 60 cooking tricks they stopped teaching that are costing you money. Using wax paper instead of plastic wrap for baking preparation was a versatile and multi-use trick taught by Betty Crocker for layering, wrapping, and preventing sticking in the kitchen. Before plastic wrap became common, cooks used wax paper to separate dough layers, line pans, and cover foods during preparation. Its non-stick surface made it ideal for rolling out pastry or chocolate-covered treats without mess. Wax paper also helped preserve freshness when wrapping baked goods or sandwiches. This practical substitution reflected a time when synthetic plastics were not yet widely accessible or affordable. Its ability to keep ingredients separated and clean while allowing some breathability was invaluable in managing kitchen workflows. Though modern cooks often default to plastic wrap, revisiting wax paper offers a sustainable and effective alternative that echoes classic cooking methods. It also provides a tactile and nostalgic connection to mid-century kitchens where resourcefulness was key. Egg drop into oatmeal was one of those Depression-era tricks that showed how much families valued stretching every meal. Oats were already cheap and filling, but adding a raw egg stirred into the hot porridge transformed it into something heartier. The heat from the oats cooked the egg just enough, blending it into a creamy texture while boosting the protein. Old cookbooks recommended this method for breakfast because it kept people full longer during hard labor or school days. It was also a way to disguise powdered or older eggs, since the flavor mixed seamlessly into the oats. Parents liked it because it gave children a stronger start without needing extra ingredients that were expensive or hard to find. A bowl of oatmeal with an egg became a symbol of resilience, showing how something so simple could feel nourishing. It was not fancy, but in kitchens that had to make every bite count, it carried a kind of quiet brilliance. Even today, it remains a clever reminder that thrift and nutrition often went hand in hand. Long before milk was processed, standardized, and stripped of its quirks, it had layers. And if you left it untouched overnight in a glass bottle, the cream would rise to the top. That thick, velvety layer was gold. You could skim it off with a spoon and use it to make butter, whipped toppings, or richer baked goods. The milk below was thinner, yes, but still perfectly fine for drinking or cooking. This trick was part of everyday kitchen life before homogenized milk flattened everything into one uniform texture. People knew how to work with it, how to read its signs, and how to get the most from it. No one waited for a product to be cream-enriched or extra thick. They just used what was already there. Grocery stores moved away from this version of milk on purpose. Less separation means more consistency, longer shelf life, and fewer complaints. But it also meant the end of something more personal, more connected. A quiet act like skimming cream gave families that tiny moment of luxury at home. And we gave it up without realizing what we lost. Leftover mashed potatoes turned into pancakes was a breakfast staple for families who refused to waste a single spoonful. The process was simple. You took cold, firm mashed potatoes, added a bit of flour or egg, and dropped the mixture into a hot skillet. Crisp on the outside, soft on the inside. It was comforting, filling, and downright thrifty. Housewives in the 1950s knew better than to toss leftovers. Potatoes were cheap, yes, but not so cheap you could afford to throw them out. These pancakes stretched a single dish across meals and added warmth to the morning. You could dress them up with chopped onions, garlic, or even leftover bits of cheese. Fried in bacon grease or butter, they gave off the kind of smell that made a kitchen feel alive. Kids loved them, husbands praised them, and moms appreciated the ease. Leftover night did not always mean boring. It meant clever. It meant knowing how to make something new out of what had already served its purpose. These potato pancakes did not just fill bellies, they proved that a little imagination could go a long, long way. Substituting butter with bacon drippings for cooking was a tasty and efficient way to replace scarce fats. Butter was rationed during World War II, forcing cooks to seek alternatives that could provide flavor and needed fat for cooking and baking. Bacon drippings, the fat rendered after frying bacon, were collected and saved for reuse in frying vegetables, seasoning beans, or baking savory dishes. This leftover fat added a smoky richness to meals that butter sometimes could not provide. Using bacon drippings was economical, preventing waste and making the most of limited resources. Families learned to store drippings carefully, sometimes mixing them with other fats to stretch them further. This substitution became a staple of wartime kitchens, balancing scarcity with flavor. Today, it serves as a reminder that necessity often inspires delicious creativity, turning something left over into a prized cooking ingredient. Using crushed crackers as a versatile binder and topping was a handy pantry staple for casseroles and coatings taught in many mid-century cookbooks. Instead of breadcrumbs, home cooks often crushed saltine or soda crackers to bind meat mixtures or sprinkle over casseroles for a golden crust. This trick gave dishes a satisfying texture and flavor while making use of readily available ingredients. Betty Crocker's recipes highlighted this approach as an economical and reliable way to improve both presentation and taste. Crackers added a subtle saltiness and crunch that transformed simple meals into crowd pleasers without extra cost. This technique was common in homes across the country, especially during rationing or times when fresh bread was scarce. Though less common today, using crushed crackers remains a timeless kitchen hack that enhances both binding and crisp topping in comfort foods. Egg wash shine for pies was one of the most common hacks in old cookbooks, and for good reason. Nothing made a pie look more inviting than a golden, glossy crust. The trick was simple. Beat an egg, sometimes with a spoonful of water or milk, and brush it over the dough before baking. As it cooked, the proteins browned beautifully, leaving a sheen that looked professional even in the humblest kitchens. Housewives swore by it for pies, pastries, and even dinner rolls, since it gave everything a polished finish. During times when presentation mattered, such as church gatherings, community suppers, or holiday meals, an egg wash could turn an ordinary dish into something that looked extraordinary. Old cookbooks framed it as a way to take pride in your food, even when ingredients were scarce. It cost almost nothing, yet added a touch of magic to every bake. Children would often hover near the oven, waiting to see the crust transform from pale dough into a golden treat. Egg wash was not just about taste, it was about the joy of seeing your work come alive in the oven. You know those mystery dishes your grandmother used to make? The ones that tasted like home but were never exactly the same twice? Chances are they were hiding leftovers. Whether it was yesterday's roast, a few spoonfuls of vegetables, or that last scoop of mashed potatoes, nothing went to waste. These odds and ends were chopped, seasoned, and folded into pot pies, meat fritters, savory pancakes, or hush puppies. And just like that, you had dinner. These were not glamorous meals, but they were practical, filling, and built on imagination. Grocery stores now sell freezer meals with names like Chef's Surprise, but they are a pale copy of what people used to do on their own. This was food made from food, stretched and reimagined into something new. You never admitted you were serving leftovers because technically, you were not. You were making something else entirely. Today, we throw out too much because we forgot how to repurpose what is already cooked. These tricks were born from necessity, but carried a kind of quiet pride with them. That is something the big stores never quite understood. Reusing cereal bag liners as wax paper was a kitchen trick hiding in plain sight. Once the kids had torn through their cornflakes or puffed rice, housewives would carefully remove the inner plastic liner, shake out the crumbs, and set it aside. This waxy, crinkly paper was not trash. It was an all-purpose kitchen tool. You could wrap sandwiches in it, cover leftovers, line cake pans, or even roll out pie dough without sticking. It was durable, clean, and, best of all, completely free. In the 1950s, every penny saved counted, and this clever reuse was like a quiet rebellion against waste. Homemakers found dozens of ways to repurpose what others might throw out. It was a lesson in resourcefulness, not just frugality. If you grew up during that time, you probably remember the sound of those liners being folded and tucked away in a drawer. That crinkle was the sound of a house being run right. Modern kitchens may have parchment and plastic wraps galore, but nothing beats the feeling of giving something a second life. In a way, cereal bags were just another example of how every part of the home was expected to pull its weight, even the packaging. Creating homemade mustard from mustard seeds was a clever, cost-saving way to add flavor when store-bought condiments were scarce. Mustard seeds were inexpensive and could be ground at home to make fresh mustard pastes of varying heat and intensity. This homemade version was used to season meats, dress vegetables, and enliven sandwiches. Making mustard from scratch gave cooks control over the ingredients and helped avoid reliance on rationed or imported products. Mustard's sharpness also helped mask the blandness or substitutions often found in wartime dishes. Many families learned to prepare and store their own mustard, turning a simple seed into a pantry essential. This practice encouraged self-sufficiency and brought bold flavor to otherwise plain meals. Homemade mustard's popularity during the war reminds us that small touches can make a big difference in food enjoyment, especially when resources are tight. Reviving stale bread with a damp towel and oven heat was a clever way to avoid waste and enjoy fresh-tasting bread longer. Rather than tossing hard or dried-out loaves, Betty Crocker recommended wrapping the bread in a slightly damp kitchen towel and placing it in a warm oven for a few minutes. The steam created would soften the crust and refresh the crumb, making the bread enjoyable again for sandwiches or toast. This simple technique was essential when bread was a precious commodity, especially during rationing and economic hardship. It gave home cooks a second chance to use leftovers without sacrificing quality or taste. The trick was easy enough for beginners and made a big difference in reducing food waste. Today, many forget this old-school method, relying on buying fresh bread instead. Bringing it back not only saves money, but also reconnects us with a time when nothing edible was wasted. Using egg whites to clarify broth was one of those clever tricks that transformed an ordinary pot of soup into something beautiful. The idea was simple: whisk a few whites and stir them into the hot liquid. As they cooked, the whites would trap the cloudy bits of fat and residue, rising to the surface and carrying the impurities with them. You could then skim off the solidified layer, leaving a broth that was clear, golden, and elegant enough to serve at any table. It was a method borrowed from professional kitchens, but made its way into old cookbooks so families at home could feel like they were serving something refined. This hack mattered in times when soups were stretched to feed large groups, since presentation made the difference between a poor meal and one that felt nourishing. A clear broth gave the impression of care and quality, even if the ingredients were humble. Old homemakers swore by this trick for Sunday dinners and holiday feasts, showing that ingenuity was just as important as the food itself. Wax paper pie crust rolling was a small, neat miracle in every baker's routine. The trick was simple. Place dough between 2 sheets of wax paper, then roll it flat without ever touching the counter. No flour clouds, no sticking, no cleaning up bits of dough from every corner. It made rolling faster and neater and helped keep the crust light. Housewives found that pie dough came out more even, less dry, and easy to lift into the pan without tearing. Wax paper acted like a gentle buffer, holding everything in place and making cleanup a breeze. In a kitchen where mess meant more work and time was precious, this trick was a quiet revolution. You did not need a fancy mat or special tools, just a roll of wax paper from the drawer and a steady hand. Even the rolling pin stayed clean, and once the pie was in the oven, you tossed the paper with no fuss. It was neat, clever, and all about working smarter. Tricks like this helped make dessert feel possible even on the busiest, tightest days, and that meant everything. Using leftover coffee grounds as a meat tenderizer was an unusual but surprisingly effective wartime kitchen hack. After brewing coffee, the spent grounds were saved instead of discarded, then used to tenderize tougher cuts of meat. The slightly abrasive texture helped break down fibers, while the natural acids in coffee softened the meat, improving texture and flavor. This trick allowed families to make the most of less expensive, tougher cuts, which were common during rationing. It was an easy, cost-free way to improve meals without needing special ingredients or equipment. The grounds could be rubbed directly onto meat or included in marinades, showing how every kitchen waste product was reimagined as a resource. This method reflected a larger trend of making do with what was available and finding hidden uses for ordinary items. Though it might sound strange today, it was one of many clever adaptations that helped stretch food budgets. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions can come from unexpected places. How to soften brown sugar with a slice of bread was an old but incredibly effective method to fix hardened sugar that saved countless cooks from frustration. Brown sugar, with its natural molasses content, tends to dry out and form solid lumps when left exposed to air. Betty Crocker recommended placing a slice of fresh bread in the container with the sugar and sealing it tight for a day or two. The moisture from the bread would transfer to the sugar, restoring its soft, crumbly texture without damaging flavor. This simple kitchen hack meant no waste and no need to buy new sugar, which was particularly important during rationing periods. It was a household secret passed down through generations and featured in many mid-century cookbooks. Today, people might reach for microwaves or commercial softening products, but the bread trick remains an all-natural, cost-free solution that really works. It also teaches patience and resourcefulness in the kitchen. The lemon egg cleaner for copper pots was an old kitchen hack that blended frugality with effectiveness. Copper cookware was prized for its beauty and usefulness, but it tarnished easily and store-bought cleaners were costly luxuries. Cookbooks advised mixing egg whites with lemon juice to create a natural polish that cut through dull spots and grime. The mild acidity of the lemon worked to dissolve tarnish, while the proteins from the egg white helped bind and lift residue. Housewives found that with a little scrubbing, pots and pans gleamed like new again. This method fit the thrifty spirit of the times, where every item had to be maintained as long as possible. A polished copper pot not only looked handsome hanging in the kitchen, but also symbolized pride in keeping a home neat despite shortages. Passing guests could tell a lot about a household by the shine of its cookware, and clever tricks like this made sure things stayed presentable. It was one more example of stretching what you had instead of buying what you did not need. Long before the mason jar became a Pinterest trend, people used whatever they had, like old coffee cans, for pickling. Those sturdy metal containers with snap-on lids were perfect for storing quick fridge pickles. You packed them with sliced cucumbers, onions, or green beans, poured in vinegar, water, sugar, and spices, and tucked the whole thing into the fridge or cellar. No need to process or boil. These were not long-term preserves. They were crisp, sharp, and ready in a day or two. It was a fast, no-fuss way to stretch fresh produce a little further. Coffee cans were everywhere, and they were built to last. When the jar shortage hit during wartime, this method took off even more. People got creative because they had to. Grocery stores today will sell you all the gadgets and kits, but this trick worked with what was already in the house. It was quiet ingenuity, saving jars for real canning and letting the coffee tin carry the weight for everyday needs. The pickles were tart, crunchy, and often made with love. And the can? It just kept going. Saving butter wrappers for greasing pans was one of the quietest and cleverest habits in a 1950s kitchen. After using a stick of butter, a housewife would fold the wrapper neatly and store it in the fridge or freezer. When it came time to bake, she would pull it out and use the residue to coat cake tins, cookie sheets, or muffin trays. It gave just enough grease to keep things from sticking, no mess, no waste, and no need for extra butter. You were not wasting a thing. That small swipe of leftover fat did more than you would expect. It smelled like something was about to be baked, even before the oven warmed up. Housewives passed this trick down without thinking, and their daughters folded the wrappers just the same. It was a small act of thrift, but it came from a bigger mindset. Waste nothing, use everything. Even paper soaked in butter had a second life. In homes where every bit counted, even the wrapper had a job to do, and it did it well. Using gelatin to set leftover meat juices was an ingenious way to transform scraps into a new dish that stretched ingredients further. After roasting or boiling meat, the remaining juices were collected and combined with gelatin, which was more commonly used in wartime cooking than it is now. This mixture was poured into molds and refrigerated, creating savory aspects that could be sliced and served. These dishes added variety to meals and made use of parts that might otherwise be discarded. Gelatin helped preserve the nutrients and flavors, providing protein-rich options even when fresh meat was limited. The resulting aspics were often mixed with chopped vegetables, eggs, or bits of meat, making them more appealing and hearty. This technique reflected the resourcefulness of wartime kitchens, where wasting any part of food was unacceptable. Aspics served cold also offered a refreshing change in warmer months. Although gelatin dishes have faded from modern menus, they once held a respected place at tables across America. Rediscovering this trick shows how creativity and respect for ingredients helped families survive with less. Using gelatin to thicken sauces without lumps was a classic Betty Crocker trick that brought a silky smooth finish to gravies and desserts alike. Unlike modern methods that often rely on flour or cornstarch, this approach involved dissolving gelatin gently in a small amount of cold water before gradually adding it to warm sauces. This prevented any clumping, leaving behind a glossy texture that elevated even the simplest dishes. It was a reliable technique, especially during times when flour could be scarce or when cooks wanted a clear sauce rather than a cloudy one. Home cooks treasured this tip because it was easy, effective, and made their meals look as good as they tasted. Though it faded with time as convenience cooking took over, this gelatin method is still valuable today for those who want restaurant-quality results at home. Many forget that gelatin is a powerful thickening agent beyond desserts, and Betty Crocker was one of the first to bring this knowledge into the average kitchen. Reintroducing this trick could transform your sauces from ordinary to extraordinary without the hassle of lumps or heavy flour flavors. Eggshell coffee was one of those odd-sounding but ingenious hacks that actually made sense once you tried it. The idea was to save clean eggshells, crush them up, and stir them into the coffee grounds before brewing. As hot water passed through, the shell's alkaline nature balanced the bitterness of the beans, giving a smoother, milder cup. This trick became popular during the Depression when cheap coffee was often bitter and low quality. Instead of tossing it out, families made it drinkable with something they already had on hand. Old cookbooks praised the method not only for taste, but also for how it clarified the liquid, making the coffee look more appealing in the pot. Nothing went to waste in those days, and eggshells were treated like tiny treasures that could pull double duty in the kitchen. People even claimed the minerals from the shell added a touch of nutrition, though that was not the main goal. Eggshell coffee became a symbol of resilience, turning a harsh drink into something comforting without spending another dime. It was clever, practical, and very much in line with the frugality of its time. Milk was just past its prime and starting to sour, you did not throw it away. You turned it into cheese. Cottage cheese, farmer's cheese, or a soft spreadable mix. Each version had its own place at the table. The process was simple. Warm the milk, stir in a little vinegar or lemon juice, and let it curdle. Then drain the curds through a cloth and press lightly until they held their shape. What you were left with was something creamy, tangy, and surprisingly filling. You could spread it on toast, mix it with herbs, or even add it to casseroles and fillings. For people without regular access to store-bought cheese, this was a revelation. It let families create something nourishing and rich from milk that would otherwise go bad. That is the kind of alchemy supermarkets have no interest in reminding you of. After all, if you knew how to make your own cheese, you might skip the dairy aisle altogether. And that quiet independence, the ability to make do with what you had, is exactly the kind of power that deserves to come back. Soaking wilted lettuce in cold vinegar water was a trick passed down like a whispered kitchen secret. When lettuce started to droop or go soft, it did not get tossed, it got revived. Housewives would fill a bowl with cold water, add a splash of white vinegar, and let the greens soak for 10 to 20 minutes. It crisped them right back up. No waste, no disappointment. This simple trick saved countless salads from being sad or soggy. Before pre-washed greens in bags, lettuce came fresh from the store or garden, and it started wilting fast if not used quickly. But smart homemakers had ways around that. It also helped clean the leaves better than water alone, which was especially important back then. Lettuce was expensive enough without throwing it out before it hit the plate. The result? A crisp, refreshing base for salads that looked and tasted brand new. It may not seem like much today, but in the 1950s, this trick was gold. It kept family meals fresh, appetites satisfied, and budgets intact, all from a little bowl of water and vinegar. No one bragged about it. They just did it, and it worked. Making soup stock from watermelon rinds was an inventive way to use parts of food that would normally be thrown away, adding flavor and substance to meals. During times of scarcity, nothing was wasted, and watermelon rinds, often discarded, became a valuable ingredient in homemade soup stocks. The rinds imparted a subtle sweetness and body to broths, while extending the volume of soup without extra cost. Combining these with vegetable scraps or bones created a nourishing base for soups and stews. This practice illustrated the wartime mindset of resourcefulness and frugality, where every part of food was utilized to its fullest. Using watermelon rinds helped stretch limited supplies and added variety to diets that were often repetitive. This little-known trick was popular in regions where watermelons were abundant during summer months, and families preserved rinds by drying or pickling them for later use. Making stock this way not only conserved food but also demonstrated the ingenuity of cooks who made the best of their circumstances. Making fluffy mashed potatoes by adding hot milk gradually was a classic technique to avoid gluey or heavy mashed potatoes. Betty Crocker emphasized warming the milk before mixing it slowly into cooked potatoes, which helped the starches absorb liquid evenly and created a smooth, light texture. Cold milk shocked the potatoes and caused them to seize up, resulting in a dense and sticky mash. This technique was especially important when potatoes were a staple food and needed to be prepared just right to satisfy hungry families. The gradual addition allowed for better control over consistency and avoided watery or overly stiff results. While simple, it was a mark of good home cooking skill in mid-century kitchens. Rediscovering this trick can turn ordinary mashed potatoes into a creamy delight worthy of any dinner table. The egg yolk hand softener was one of those beauty hacks tucked into the back pages of old cookbooks. Housewives were always looking for ways to make do without expensive lotions or creams, and eggs offered a solution hiding in plain sight. By mixing yolks with lemon juice or sometimes a bit of honey, they created a natural hand treatment that softened dry, rough skin. It was especially popular in rural areas where work in the fields left hands cracked and sore. Cookbooks presented it as both practical and luxurious, a little self-care using nothing more than kitchen staples. Women applied the mixture, let it sit for a few minutes, and rinsed it off to reveal smoother skin. The idea caught on because it worked and cost almost nothing. It also reflected the broader theme of resourcefulness, where even cooking ingredients doubled as beauty aids. Many families remembered mothers or grandmothers swearing by this ritual, treating it as a moment of quiet relief in busy days. It was another reminder that thrift and comfort could go hand in hand. Before bacon strips came wrapped in plastic, there was salt pork, hearty, fatty, and packed with flavor. This was the starting point for stews, beans, and slow-cooked greens. You cut off a chunk, diced it small, and rendered it in the bottom of your pot until the fat melted and the bits turned crisp. That salty fat was liquid gold. It coated vegetables and gave every dish a depth that broth alone could not provide. Salt pork kept well without refrigeration, making it a pantry staple in both urban tenements and rural cabins. You might not eat a lot of it at once, but just a spoonful flavored a whole meal. And because it was tougher and less prized than bacon, it was cheaper too. Supermarkets phased it out in favor of neatly packaged bacon slices, but for decades, this was the backbone of American cooking. It was not glamorous, but it was reliable, and it made humble food taste big. Today, most people do not even know what it is. But ask anyone who grew up before the 1950s, and they will tell you, salt pork meant supper was on its way. Folding leftovers into gelatin salads may raise eyebrows today, but in the 1950s, it was a practical and pretty way to make scraps feel special. Housewives would take bits of ham, chopped vegetables, or even shredded chicken and suspend them in flavored or plain gelatin. Poured into a mold and chilled, it transformed odds and ends into a centerpiece. These salads might look odd to modern eyes, but back then they were admired for their color, their structure, and their thrift. You could use lemon gelatin for vegetables or tomato aspic for savory meats. It stretched small portions and added elegance to a plate, especially for luncheons or church potlucks. Kids might poke at them, but guests often smiled and served themselves a slice. It was creative, yes, but more than that, it was economical. When refrigeration was unreliable and meat was expensive, gelatin preserved and presented all at once. Housewives made the most of what was left and made it look like something fresh. Today, it seems like a trend frozen in time. But at the time, it was just smart homemaking with a little showmanship on the side. Dehydrating fruits for long-term storage was a clever preservation method that helped families save their garden bounty for the winter months. Fresh fruits like apples, berries, and peaches were sliced thin and dried to remove moisture, preventing spoilage. This process concentrated the sweetness and flavor while extending shelf life without refrigeration. Dehydrated fruits were used in baking, stews, and snacks, adding natural sugars and vitamins to otherwise plain wartime diets. The practice required patience but paid off by providing nutritious ingredients when fresh produce was unavailable. Many families set up simple drying racks in sunny windows or outdoors during the warmer seasons. Dehydration also reduced bulk and weight, making fruits easier to store in limited pantry spaces. This preservation technique was a testament to the resourcefulness of home cooks determined to maximize their harvest. Today, dried fruits remain popular, but the wartime origin highlights how necessity fostered smart food conservation strategies. Soaking celery in ice water to restore crispness was a simple but ingenious fridge hack that helped vintage kitchens keep their produce fresh and crunchy longer. Celery often loses its crunch quickly, especially when stored improperly or left out too long. Betty Crocker recommended soaking the celery stalks in a bowl of ice water for about an hour before use, which would revitalize wilted celery by rehydrating the cells and firming up the texture. This was an essential trick for home cooks who relied heavily on fresh vegetables in their salads and soups, but did not have access to refrigeration as efficient as today's models. The crisp celery made every meal feel fresher and more satisfying, preventing waste in households where every bit of food mattered. This quick refresh technique was widely taught in community cookbooks and cooking classes, but over time, people forgot the simple power of ice water for produce. Rediscovering this trick can save money and add that needed snap to your dishes. Eggshell whitening for coffee cups was one of those housekeeping tricks that blended practicality with frugality. Instead of buying costly powders or scrubbing endlessly, homemakers were told to use crushed eggshells as a natural polish. When rubbed inside stained mugs or teapots, the shells acted as a gentle abrasive that lifted dark marks left by coffee or tea. This was especially helpful in households where cups were used daily and new ones were not easily bought. The hack made dishes look fresh and clean without spending extra money, which was always a priority in thrifty kitchens. Cookbooks framed it as just another way to make use of scraps that might otherwise be tossed out. Nothing went to waste, not even the shells, which were seen as having endless possibilities. For many families, the simple act of keeping cups bright and tidy was part of maintaining pride in the home. Eggshell whitening was a reminder that cleverness could often do the job of money, keeping households running smoothly on ingenuity alone. Wrapping dough in newspaper may not pass modern food safety rules, but it worked just fine for generations. When plastic wrap was not yet in every drawer, people reached for what they had. Pages from the daily paper, often dusted with flour or lightly buttered. You folded it over the dough and set the bundle in a cool corner, the icebox, or even outside in the winter air. It kept the dough firm and the butter cold, which was all that mattered. This trick helped with pie crusts, cookie dough, or anything that needed resting before baking. It was not pretty, but it did the job, and it cost nothing. You used what you read that morning to bake what you would eat that night. Grocery stores would never tell you this was once normal. After all, a roll of plastic wrap makes more profit than an old newspaper ever could. But the homes that did this were not behind the times. They were just ahead of the waste. Saving bacon grease in a tin can was a ritual in every working kitchen. It sat on the back of the stove, lid popped open, ready to catch every drop of golden fat left behind after breakfast. Housewives did not waste what could be reused, especially not something as flavorful and versatile as bacon grease. It was their secret weapon for cooking eggs, frying potatoes, making gravy, or giving soups a richer taste. A spoonful could make bland vegetables taste indulgent. It was practically its own seasoning. The grease hardened as it cooled and would keep for weeks without going bad. You did not refrigerate it, you just trusted it. Bacon was not something eaten every day, but when you had it, you made it count. Even the drippings were valuable. Housewives taught their kids to pour it safely, and it was one of the first cooking lessons many daughters learned. You knew the home was cared for when you saw that tin. And if you brought it out for company, it meant you were serious about flavor. Today, we toss grease without thinking. But back then, bacon grease was pure kitchen gold. Nothing went to waste, not even the fat from your breakfast. Stretching meatloaf with oats or breadcrumbs was a common tactic to make meat supplies go further during the shortages. When meat was scarce and expensive, people found that adding oats or breadcrumbs bulked up the mixture, making a smaller amount of ground meat feed a whole family. These fillers were inexpensive and readily available, making them perfect wartime kitchen helpers. Oats added texture and absorbed flavors, while breadcrumbs helped bind the loaf together, keeping it moist and filling. Seasonings and vegetables mixed in also helped improve the taste and nutritional value. This clever trick allowed households to serve a classic comfort food without using as much precious meat. It also introduced more fiber and whole grains into the diet, which was an unintended bonus. The stretched meatloaf became a symbol of frugality and culinary ingenuity, showing how people adapted familiar recipes to hard times. It was a meal that provided warmth and sustenance when resources were limited. Trying this method today offers a glimpse into how much thought went into conserving food during those challenging years. Canning leftover fruit juices into jellies without pectin was a homemade preservation trick popular before commercial pectins were widely available. Home cooks would collect juices from cooked fruits like apples, berries, or grapes and boil them with sugar until the mixture naturally thickened and set into jelly form. This process relied on the natural pectin content of the fruit or slow reduction to achieve the right consistency. Betty Crocker encouraged such resourceful methods to reduce waste and extend the use of precious fruit harvests, especially during the Depression and wartime. Families could preserve seasonal flavors in jars, creating sweet spreads that lasted months without refrigeration. This hands-on method required patience and careful temperature control, making it a prized skill among home canners. Though commercial pectins simplified jelly making later on, the traditional technique held a charm and authenticity that many modern cooks now seek to revive. It represents a time when food preservation was as much art as science. Whipping egg whites with copper bowls was an old trick that professional chefs and homemakers alike treasured. Copper reacted gently with the proteins in the egg, making them more stable and easier to whip into stiff peaks. Before cream of tartar became a common pantry item, this was the secret weapon for perfect meringues and soufflés. Cookbooks advised using a clean copper bowl, free of grease or residue, and whipping steadily until the whites grew glossy and tall. The results were lighter and more consistent than what you could get with glass or metal alone. In households where desserts were a rare luxury, mastering this hack made a real difference. A bowl of airy meringue could stretch a few eggs into something that looked like a feast. Families would marvel at how a humble egg transformed into a towering creation with just the right bowl and a little effort. This was the kind of knowledge passed down like treasure, ensuring baked goods came out just right. The copper bowl hack was proof that sometimes tradition knew best, long before modern shortcuts arrived. Roasting a whole onion used to be a meal in itself. Simple, hearty, and full of slow-cooked comfort. You did not need olive oil or a rack of spices. Just toss an unpeeled onion into the oven or tuck it into the coals of a fire and wait. Slowly, the inside softened, caramelized, and turned sweet, while the outer skin blackened and protected the flavor. Peel it at the table, sprinkle on salt or butter if you had it, and eat it straight from the foil or plate. For families with barely a potato left, this was a warm, filling side that required nothing but time. Onions were cheap, stored well, and brought out a kind of earthy richness when roasted whole. They could anchor a meal or stretch a small portion of meat. Today, most people roast vegetables in glossy pans with elaborate glazes, but this was bare-bones cooking, and it worked. Grocery stores rarely mention how much flavor lives in the simplest things when left alone. Roasting onions this way was a kind of quiet ritual, one that filled kitchens with warmth and made even a root vegetable feel like something special. Turning stale bread into homemade croutons was one of the simplest yet smartest tricks in a 1950s kitchen. Bread never lasted forever, especially before preservatives became the norm. But a housewife would never let a loaf go to waste. Instead, she would cut it into cubes, drizzle with a bit of oil or bacon grease, toss in whatever seasoning she had on hand, and bake until crisp. These croutons were then stored in jars and added to soups, casseroles, or salads for days to come. They brought crunch, comfort, and a sense of creativity to any meal. You did not need to buy anything new, just make the old new again. Kids loved them, husbands noticed them, and guests thought they were fancy. All from a slice that might have otherwise gone to the birds. It was a perfect example of homemaking in the 1950s, clever, quiet, and deeply practical. Housewives learned to turn a potential waste into a winning side dish, and the smell of toasting bread with a hint of garlic or butter, that alone could bring the whole family to the kitchen. Today, we buy croutons in boxes. Back then, we made them from scraps, with pride. Boiling potatoes with their skins to retain nutrients was a practical trick to maximize the nutritional value during rationing. Removing skins before cooking often wasted the fiber and vitamins that resided in and just under the potato skin. By boiling them whole with the skins on, families kept more nutrients intact, making every bite count. This method also reduced preparation time and minimized waste in kitchens where every resource mattered. After cooking, the skins were peeled off easily, sometimes used in other dishes or composted. Potatoes were a staple wartime food due to their availability and ability to grow in many regions. This simple step ensured that their health benefits were not lost in the cooking process. The technique showed how attention to detail in the kitchen could stretch limited food into a more nourishing meal. Today, many cooks appreciate this method for both nutrition and flavor, keeping a small wartime secret alive. Using potato water to thicken soups and stews naturally was a clever and economical way to avoid flour or cornstarch as thickening agents. When boiling potatoes, the starchy water left behind was often saved and added to soups or stews to create a velvety texture without needing extra ingredients. Betty Crocker's recipes encouraged this practice as a resourceful method during times when pantry staples were limited or expensive. The potato water provided a subtle richness and body, enhancing the mouthfeel of broths and reducing waste in the kitchen. This trick was especially important during the Depression and wartime rationing, when stretching ingredients was essential. It also allowed cooks to keep recipes simple and gluten-free before dietary restrictions became widely known. The use of potato water as a thickener brought a natural creaminess to dishes, transforming humble soups into hearty meals. Today, many have forgotten this straightforward technique, but it remains a valuable, zero-cost way to improve soups and stews with minimal effort. Candling eggs with a flashlight was a home version of a farmyard method that kept families from serving rotten food. Instead of trusting luck, you could hold a bright light behind the shell and see what was inside. If the yolk looked centered and the egg white appeared clear, you knew it was still good. If you saw dark spots, strange shapes, or cloudiness, it was a warning sign the egg had spoiled or developed poorly. Farmers once used candles for this, but by the time old cookbooks were spreading the advice, people had switched to small lamps or flashlights. This trick was especially useful in households that bought eggs in bulk from neighbors or raised their own hens. Eggs did not always come in neat cartons, and quality varied from one to the next. Candling let families avoid unpleasant surprises at the breakfast table while stretching their food supply further. It was a bit of detective work right in the kitchen, and children often found it fascinating. Cookbooks called it a simple way to guard your pantry and protect your family's health, all with nothing more than a steady hand and a beam of light. Burying eggs in salt or wood ash sounds like something out of an old pioneer tale, but it was common in American farm kitchens long before refrigeration became standard. People needed a way to make eggs last through the off-seasons, and this was one of the most reliable tricks in the book. You took fresh, unwashed eggs and gently buried them in a box filled with salt or sifted wood ash, making sure they did not touch. The salt pulled out moisture and prevented spoilage, while the ash kept out light and air. Stored properly in a cool pantry or cellar, these eggs could last up to several months. This method might not have made them picture perfect, but they were safe and ready to cook when needed. Scrambled, boiled, or baked into a cake, whatever the dish, having eggs on hand was a gift. It meant no trip to the store and no ration card needed. The supermarkets did not exactly promote this trick. Why would they? If you could store your own eggs year-round, you were not buying theirs. This little pile of salt-covered treasure in the pantry gave families control over their food in ways that are hard to come by now. Jell-O as a leftover preserver may sound like a party trick today, but in the 1950s, it was a serious solution to a serious problem: food waste. Housewives would take leftover vegetables, bits of meat, or even chopped eggs and suspend them in flavored or plain gelatin. The result was a molded salad that kept longer and looked surprisingly elegant on the table. It was not about being fancy. It was about stretching a meal into the next day and keeping it safe without refrigeration on every corner. Jell-O sealed the food in and slowed spoilage, giving families another day or two to use it. You would chill the mold in a shallow dish, pop it out when company came over, and suddenly leftovers became a centerpiece. Some folks raised an eyebrow at ham and lime gelatin, but others swore by it. And when choices were few, you used what worked. Housewives did not flinch. They got creative. It was frugal, clever, and oddly festive. That wobble meant something back then. It meant no waste, full bellies, and a little color on a dinner table that needed cheering up. Separating eggs with a plastic bottle instead of a yolk separator was a simple household hack popularized in vintage homemaking books as a neat alternative to specialized kitchen tools. The technique involved squeezing an empty plastic bottle slightly, positioning the opening over the cracked egg yolk, and releasing the squeeze to suction up the yolk cleanly. This method allowed cooks to separate yolks from whites quickly and with minimal mess, using common items they already had at home. It was especially useful in busy kitchens where gadgets were limited or costly. The plastic bottle trick reduced the risk of breaking yolks and saved time during baking or cooking preparations. Even as egg separators became more common, this hack remained a reliable backup for many households. It is a perfect example of resourcefulness from an era when improvisation was key to efficient cooking. Soufflé stretchers were one of the smartest ways to make a small amount of batter feed a crowd. Old cookbooks taught that whipping egg whites into stiff peaks before folding them in could transform a dense mixture into something airy and voluminous. The trick was that air did the heavy lifting, creating the illusion of more food than you actually had. Families stretched a few eggs and some flour into a dish that looked impressive and fed more people than expected. It was not just about thrift, but also about presentation, since a tall soufflé made the table feel festive. Housewives loved the admiration that came with serving something that seemed extravagant even though it was made from scraps. The soufflé stretcher trick embodied the theme of making do with less while keeping spirits high. It was the kind of recipe that carried both pride and practicality, proving that technique mattered as much as ingredients. Even today, the same principle is used in countless recipes to create volume and texture out of the simplest things. The heel of a loaf of bread, the end piece everyone skips, used to have a starring role. Instead of tossing it out, folks would toast it up and serve it with soup, stews, or beans. It was crunchy, warm, and just enough to soak up the broth. Sometimes it was rubbed with garlic or spread with butter if you were lucky. These end slices were too precious to waste and too useful to ignore. Before store-bought crackers became the default side, toasted bread ends filled the gap. They were simple and satisfying and made you feel like no part of your meal went forgotten. The best part? They were free. You already had them. That alone made them better than anything wrapped in plastic on a supermarket shelf. This was food born out of thoughtfulness, not packaging. It reminded people that even the smallest scraps had value. It is a quiet kind of wisdom, one that the big food companies would rather you not rediscover. But it is still there, waiting in the bread box. Reheating cold biscuits with a damp towel was one of those little touches that made leftovers feel fresh again. When dinner rolls or breakfast biscuits turned dry overnight, you did not toss them. You brought them back to life. Housewives would dampen a clean kitchen towel, wrap the biscuits inside, and heat them in a warm oven for a few minutes. The steam worked its magic. Biscuits softened up, regained their warmth, and felt nearly fresh-baked. This trick made second-day meals feel like first-class dining. It took 5 minutes, no extra cost, and 0 complaints at the table. In homes where everything counted, even baked goods got a second chance. The towel trick was simple, quiet, and incredibly satisfying. It meant care. It meant a kitchen that did not quit. And most importantly, it meant feeding your family without apology. These little flowery rounds of comfort came back fluffy, warm, and ready to be slathered in butter. All because someone took the time to do it right. No shortcuts, just smart ones. Making war ration sandwich spreads was a clever way to turn limited ingredients into something satisfying. People would blend canned fish, often salmon or mackerel, with whatever vegetables were on hand, like pickles or onions. Mayonnaise substitutes made from rationed ingredients helped bind it all together. This mixture stretched thinly over bread, turning simple sandwiches into meals that could fill bellies without breaking wartime restrictions. The beauty of these spreads was their adaptability. If fresh produce was scarce, canned or preserved vegetables stepped in. The result was a flavorful, nutritious option that made the most of pantry staples. These spreads were also easy to prepare, which helped busy families feed themselves quickly. They became a staple at lunchtime tables across the country, proving that resourcefulness could turn the leanest rations into something worth eating. The practice encouraged creativity and minimized waste, both essential during the war. Today, these simple sandwich spreads remind us of a time when making do was not just a choice, but a necessity. Trying out these recipes can give us a taste of resilience and cleverness from kitchens of the past. Stretching meat with bread or cereal and meatloaf was a frugal mid-century tip that helped bulk up protein dishes affordably without sacrificing flavor or texture. Betty Crocker's recipes frequently included soaking breadcrumbs or crushed cereal in milk or water before mixing them into ground meat. This not only increased the volume of the loaf but also added moisture and tenderness, making the meatloaf go further on a tight budget. The technique was especially popular during the Depression and wartime rationing when meat was expensive and limited. Using pantry staples to extend precious protein allowed families to feed more mouths with less meat, reducing waste while maintaining satisfying meals. This clever hack became a foundation of home cooking for generations and is still taught in some classic recipe collections. Understanding this method reminds modern cooks that frugality and flavor can coexist and that simple ingredients can elevate economical dishes. Egg-based mayonnaise from scratch was a staple recipe in old cookbooks before store-bought jars became standard. The process required patience and skill, slowly whisking oil into egg yolks until the mixture thickened into a creamy spread. A splash of vinegar or lemon juice gave it tang and acted as a stabilizer. Families relied on this method when convenience foods were not yet common, and homemade mayonnaise was often fresher and richer than anything from a shop. It was used for sandwiches, salads, and countless other dishes, stretching a few simple ingredients into something versatile. Cookbooks emphasized careful whisking, warning that rushing the process could cause the sauce to break apart. For many homemakers, mastering mayonnaise was a badge of pride, proof of competence in the kitchen. It showcased how eggs could serve as the foundation for something far beyond breakfast. Even as jars filled store shelves later, the tradition of making it by hand remained strong in many families. It was a recipe born of patience, thrift, and the belief that nothing was too simple to make yourself. Stretching meat was a skill every home cook learned whether they wanted to or not. One of the oldest and smartest tricks was mixing cracked wheat or farina into ground beef, pork, or turkey. You boiled the grain just enough to soften it, then folded it into the meat with spices, onion, maybe an egg if you had one. Suddenly, a single pound of meat could feed a family of 5 instead of 3. It showed up in meatloaf, meatballs, patties, and even stuffed vegetables. The grain soaked up flavor, added body, and made the dish feel full without costing extra. It was not about tricking anyone. It was about getting by. Mothers knew exactly how much wheat to add before the texture turned mushy. You learned by doing and by stretching every meal as far as it could go. Grocery stores today sell pre-packed meat stretchers in colorful boxes, but nothing beats the know-how that came straight from your own pantry. These were tricks that helped families survive tight times with a full belly and a little dignity. That is the kind of knowledge that never should have been forgotten. Using evaporated milk as a cream substitute was an essential 1950s kitchen trick. Cream was expensive, spoiled fast, and was not always easy to find at the corner store. But evaporated milk came in a can, lasted forever, and delivered the richness housewives needed to whip up sauces, soups, and desserts. They would shake the can, open it, and pour it right into the pot like a secret ingredient. It thickened things beautifully and gave food that silky texture people usually only got at diners or supper clubs. It worked in coffee, mashed potatoes, fudge, even homemade ice cream, and it cost a fraction of what fresh cream did. Housewives swore by it, not because they had to, but because it worked. If you were lucky enough to have 2 cans, you could even whip it for pies or pudding toppings. It sounds like a hack today, but back then, it was just kitchen smarts. The pantry always had a few tucked away. In a time where smart substitutions meant the difference between skipping dessert or having something sweet, evaporated milk stepped in as the quiet hero. It made frugal feel fancy, and that mattered more than anyone let on. Make cooking with pressure. Cookers for efficiency became a valuable trick during World War II when fuel and time were limited. Pressure cookers reduced cooking times drastically by trapping steam and raising the boiling point of water. This meant tougher cuts of meat and dried beans could be prepared quickly, saving both energy and precious time. Many families learned to use pressure cookers to stretch ingredients further, making dishes that would otherwise take hours on the stove. These pots also helped preserve nutrients that might be lost during longer cooking. The ability to prepare a hearty meal fast was essential when rationing limited both fuel and food. Pressure cookers became common in wartime kitchens, praised for their practicality and convenience. Today, while electric appliances have taken over, the principles of pressure cooking remain a reminder of how innovation met necessity. Using a pressure cooker was not just about speed, it was about making the most of scarce resources and easing daily burdens in difficult times. Freezing leftover milk in ice cube trays for coffee or baking was a neat storage trick rarely seen today but cherished in vintage kitchens. Rather than wasting unused milk or cream, home cooks poured the extra liquid into ice cube trays and froze it into convenient single-use portions. These cubes could then be popped directly into coffee, hot chocolate, or recipes calling for small amounts of milk without the need to thaw a whole container. Betty Crocker's advice encouraged this practice as a way to reduce spoilage and stretch dairy products, which were often rationed or costly. The trick saved money and prevented the hassle of discarding spoiled milk. Although contemporary refrigeration and packaging make this less common, freezing milk in cubes remains a smart solution for anyone looking to cut waste and have precise portions ready at a moment's notice. It is a testament to simple but effective kitchen resourcefulness. Egg whites as glue may sound strange today, but it was once a clever and trusted solution in both kitchens and households. The sticky, binding quality of raw egg whites made them useful beyond cooking. Old cookbooks and homemaking guides recommended them for sealing pastry edges, ensuring pies and turnovers did not burst open in the oven. Outside of baking, Thrifty families also used them to mend torn paper or even glue on labels when paste was not available. This dual purpose reflected a time when nothing was wasted, and every part of an egg found a second life. It was an especially helpful hack for households with children who often needed quick fixes for school projects or play. The egg white would dry clear and firm, leaving no trace once it was set. People even joked that eggs were nature's all-in-one kit: food, beauty aid, and crafting supply. While modern adhesives have replaced it, the hack showed just how inventive earlier generations could be with the simplest resources. Egg whites as glue became one more reminder that frugality was often the mother of creativity. Grating cold butter into pastry dough may sound like a modern baking hack, but it is older than most kitchen gadgets you will ever own. Before food processors or electric mixers, people used their hands, knives, or box graters to work butter into flour, especially when making pie crusts or biscuits. The trick was to keep the butter as cold as possible so it did not melt into the flour. Grated butter created little pockets in the dough, and when baked, those pockets turned into flake after buttery flake. It made crusts lighter, layers crisper, and the end result far more satisfying. Best of all, it was cheap and easy. No need for a fancy kitchen tool or a prepackaged mix, just butter, a grater, and a little elbow grease. It kept the dough tender, and it gave bakers more control over texture without overworking the mix. Grocery stores have long since replaced this kind of kitchen knowledge with ready-made pie crusts in plastic tubes. But the folks who knew how to do this by hand got results that no store-bought shortcut could match. This was precision, learned in warm kitchens long before appliances did the work. When storing celery in aluminum foil was one of those little-known tricks that separated a wasteful kitchen from a wise one. Plastic wrap was not yet a common household item, and Tupperware was still a novelty for many families. So when a bunch of celery started to go limp, housewives would wrap it tightly in aluminum foil and tuck it into the fridge. This simple act worked like a charm. The foil let just enough moisture escape while keeping the celery firm and fresh. No soggy stalks, no odd smells, no food thrown out. That foil wrap could stretch a single bunch for nearly 2 weeks. Kids still got their crunchy snack, and dinner still had that satisfying snap in a soup or casserole. It sounds small, but it meant less waste and more money saved over time. Housewives passed this trick down like family folklore. You saw your mother do it, so you did it too. It was quiet, unfussy, and brilliant. In a time when food was money and money was tight, even celery got the 5-star treatment. You may not see it on a box today, but aluminum foil was a kitchen MVP before it even had the title. Using cabbage leaves as wraps for stuffed vegetables was a natural and economical way to hold ingredients together during times of scarcity. Large cabbage leaves served as edible containers for mixtures of grains, vegetables, and sometimes small amounts of meat. Wrapping dishes this way conserved cooking vessels and made serving easier. The leaves added a mild, fresh flavor and extra fiber to meals. Cabbage was widely available, inexpensive, and hearty, making it a perfect vegetable to support this technique. Stuffed cabbage leaves were filling and visually appealing, offering a sense of comfort despite limited ingredients. This method also reflected the wartime emphasis on stretching every resource without waste. Many families passed down recipes that used cabbage wraps, keeping the tradition alive long after rationing ended. Revisiting this trick today reveals how simple, affordable vegetables became heroes in kitchens facing adversity. Using cold water to rinse cooked pasta to stop cooking was a mid-century tip that helped home cooks achieve better texture in pasta salads and other chilled dishes. After boiling pasta to the desired doneness, Betty Crocker and other classic cookbooks recommended draining it and rinsing immediately under cold running water. This step quickly halted the cooking process, preventing the noodles from becoming mushy or overcooked. It also removed excess starch, which could cause pasta to stick together when cooled. The result was firm, separate strands ideal for cold salads or chilled dishes served at picnics and potlucks. This simple technique was especially important before modern quick-cook pastas and refrigeration advances. It helped ensure consistent quality and presentation. Although often skipped today, Revisiting this cold rinse step can significantly improve pasta dishes served cold or at room temperature. The vinegar water poaching trick was one of those quiet secrets passed through generations in cookbooks. Everyone knew poached eggs were delicious, but they were also notoriously messy to make. Drop one into simmering water and the whites might spread everywhere, leaving you with a pot full of stray ribbons. The hack was to add a spoonful of vinegar to the water, which helped the proteins set quickly and hold together. Suddenly, you had neat, compact eggs that looked worthy of a restaurant breakfast. It was a small touch that made a big difference, especially for families who wanted to impress guests without spending extra. The vinegar's tang did not carry over into the flavor if you used just the right amount, and it worked with any kind of egg. Cookbooks promoted this method as foolproof, saving both time and frustration. In an age where eggs were too precious to waste, knowing how to poach them neatly mattered. The vinegar trick gave home cooks confidence, proving once again that the simplest solutions were often the smartest. It is still the easiest way to get that perfect poached egg every time. Mock foods were some of the most creative tricks to ever come out of a humble kitchen. These were recipes made to look and taste like the real thing, without using any of the expensive ingredients. Mock apple pie was one of the most famous, made with Ritz crackers, sugar, cinnamon, and lemon juice instead of apples. It sounds odd, but once baked, it fooled even the sharpest tongue. There was mock duck made from seasoned wheat gluten, shaped and browned to mimic roasted meat. Mock sausages were mashed beans with spices, shaped and pan-fried. These ideas were born during rationing, when people could not get their hands on sugar, meat, or fresh produce. Instead of going without, they got inventive. These mock dishes were not just substitutions, they were proud declarations that dinner was still happening. Grocery stores today sell imitation foods, but they lack the honesty and ingenuity of these original versions. This was not factory deception. It was resourcefulness, straight from a home cook doing their best. Condensed soup as a sauce base was the shortcut that felt anything but lazy. Cream of mushroom, tomato, chicken, it all came in cans stacked high in the pantry. Housewives relied on them to turn plain casseroles into creamy, hearty meals with just one stir. Instead of making bechamel from scratch, you opened a can and added milk or broth. Suddenly, you had a thick, smooth sauce that tasted homemade. It was fast, affordable, and tasted good with nearly everything: pasta, rice, meat, or vegetables. One can could coat an entire dish. And when you were feeding 5 people on a 2-meal budget, that mattered. It helped bring consistency to meals and gave new life to leftovers. You could even mix 2 flavors to make your own twist. It was a blank canvas that worked with whatever was in the fridge. That kind of flexibility was gold in a 1950s kitchen. These soups may have started as shelf-stable convenience food, but they became a trusted tool in every cook's kit. Housewives did not just use them, they elevated them. And that was the trick all along. Cooking cornmeal. Spoon bread as a bread substitute was a clever way to fill the gap when traditional bread was scarce during wartime. Spoon bread was a soft, moist baked dish made from cornmeal, milk, eggs, and butter or fat, creating a texture somewhere between cornbread and a soufflé. This dish was easy to make with pantry staples and required less flour than typical bread recipes, making it perfect for rationing times. Spoon bread was served alongside soups, stews, and main dishes, providing a comforting and filling accompaniment. Its creamy texture and mild flavor made it a favorite substitute for conventional bread, which was often unavailable or in limited supply. This recipe also showcased the versatility of cornmeal, an inexpensive and widely available ingredient that became a backbone for many wartime meals. Spoon bread required simple equipment and minimal preparation time, fitting well into the busy schedules of wartime cooks. Today, it is remembered as a nostalgic comfort food, a symbol of how kitchens adapted with creative substitutes to maintain hearty meals. Preserving herbs in oil for longer freshness was a smart pantry trick, cherished in vintage kitchens to keep garden herbs usable well beyond their natural shelf life. Instead of letting herbs wilt or dry out quickly, home cooks would finely chop fresh herbs like parsley, thyme, or rosemary and pack them tightly into clean glass jars. Then they would cover the herbs completely with olive oil or vegetable oil, sealing the jar tightly to prevent air exposure. This method created a flavorful, herb-infused oil that could be used in cooking or as a finishing touch for dishes. Not only did this technique extend the herbs' usability through winter months, but it also captured their fresh flavors in a convenient form. This old-fashioned preservation trick was especially valuable before modern freezing and refrigeration methods were widespread. It allowed families to enjoy the taste of summer herbs year-round without the cost or waste of constantly buying fresh produce. Rediscovering this method today offers a delicious way to add fresh herb flavor to everyday meals with a touch of nostalgic practicality. The floating egg freshness test was one of those clever old tricks that every thrifty household swore by. Instead of cracking open every egg to see if it was still good, people would simply drop one into a bowl of water. If it sank and lay flat, you could be sure it was fresh and safe to cook. If it stood on its end, you knew it was getting older but still usable. If it floated all the way to the top, it meant the inside had spoiled and it was best left out. It worked because air slowly seeped into eggs as they aged, making them lighter and more buoyant over time. This method did not require any special tools or extra effort, which made it perfect for frugal kitchens during the Depression and wartime. Cookbooks loved passing along this simple test because it kept families from wasting food when every scrap counted. Housewives taught it to their children, who later carried the lesson into their own homes. It was a quiet act of kitchen wisdom, and even now it still works just as well as it did then. Sometimes the best hacks are the ones nature itself makes possible. Saving potato peels was not just clever, it was survival dressed up as a snack. In kitchens where nothing was wasted, the peels were scrubbed, sliced into strips, and tossed in leftover grease or oil before being crisped up in the oven or skillet. Some folks added a pinch of salt, while others used paprika or dried herbs to bring them to life. These made a perfectly crunchy side for soups, or even a midday bite on their own. But that was only half the trick. The other half went straight into the stock pot. Peels added depth and starch to broths, soups, and gravies, especially when meat was scarce or completely off the table. It was flavor pulled from scraps, cheap, easy, and resourceful. Families learned that if you boiled them long enough, you got something close to a rustic potato stock. It might not sound fancy, but it added a whole lot of heart to a pot of soup. Today, we throw peels away without a second thought. Back then, you might have gotten a scolding for that. These were the little tricks that made meals stretch further and taste better, and they were far too useful to just disappear. Using mayonnaise as a moisture booster in cakes was one of those tricks that seemed odd on the surface, but in practice, it worked wonders. Housewives in the 1950s were always looking for ways to keep baked goods soft and rich without using up precious butter or eggs. Mayonnaise, made from oil and eggs, added fat and moisture without affecting the flavor too much. In fact, when added to chocolate cakes or spice cakes, it made them taste even better, deeper, smoother, and softer. You would mix a few spoonfuls right into the batter, and suddenly your scratch cake had the texture of something made at a high-end bakery. You did not need frosting to make it enjoyable. The moisture locked in so well you could eat it plain with coffee. This trick became a hit at school bake sales, church potlucks, and family dinners. It was also a quiet lifesaver when ingredients were limited or rationed. If you had mayonnaise in the fridge, you had cake potential. People back then knew how to stretch what they had and still make it feel like a treat. Today, it sounds like a shortcut, but back then, it was a stroke of genius. Clever, practical, and unforgettable. Making hobo stew with mixed vegetables and meat scraps was a one-pot meal that brought together whatever was on hand to feed families efficiently. This stew combined less desirable cuts of meat, leftover vegetables, and pantry staples simmered slowly to develop flavor and tenderness. The name reflected its humble origins, but the dish was hearty and comforting. Using a single pot minimized fuel usage and cleanup time, which were valuable considerations during wartime. The flexible recipe meant cooks could adapt it to what was available, reducing waste and stretching ingredients. Hobo stew embodied the spirit of making do with less and turning scarcity into sustenance. Its warming qualities made it a favorite in many homes, especially during cold months. Today, it stands as a symbol of resilience and practical cooking wisdom from a time when every morsel mattered. Pre-soaking beans overnight to cut cooking time dramatically was a fundamental but sometimes forgotten step in classic cooking that saved both fuel and time. Before quick cook and canned beans became common, home cooks followed Betty Crocker's advice to soak dried beans in cold water for at least 8 hours or overnight. This softening process helped break down the tough outer skins of the beans, allowing them to cook evenly and more quickly the next day. It also improved digestibility by reducing complex sugars that often cause gas and bloating. Soaking not only shortened cooking times, but also ensured better texture and flavor, resulting in tender beans with a creamy interior. This simple yet vital step was especially important during the mid-century, when fuel was costly and cooking resources were limited, making every minute and calorie count. Although modern conveniences like canned beans and pressure cookers have made this step less necessary, revisiting the practice of pre-soaking beans can greatly improve the quality of homemade bean dishes. It is a tribute to traditional culinary wisdom that emphasizes patience and resourcefulness to create the best possible meals with limited resources. Eggshell seed starters were another clever use for what might otherwise be kitchen waste. Instead of tossing the shells after breakfast, families rinsed them out and filled them with a bit of soil. Seeds planted in these tiny cups sprouted just as well as they would in pots. Once the seedlings were strong enough, the entire shell could be planted directly in the ground. The calcium from the shell enriched the soil as it broke down, giving the plant a natural boost. Old cookbooks and homemaking guides praise this hack as cost-free gardening, perfect for victory gardens and backyard plots. Children loved decorating the shells with little faces before setting them on sunny windowsills, turning it into a fun project as well as a practical one. During times when every resource counted, this simple reuse of eggshells felt ingenious. It allowed families to stretch their supplies while adding a touch of creativity to daily life. Even today, the idea still feels fresh and clever, a reminder of how older generations made every scrap serve a purpose. Melting leftover candy into glaze was one of those sweet tricks no one talked about, but everyone did. Bits of peppermint sticks, butterscotch discs, or marshmallows were tossed into a saucepan with a splash of milk or butter and stirred until smooth. The result was a sticky, shiny glaze that coated cookies, cakes, or even sliced apples. It worked especially well after holidays when candy seemed to multiply, and families wanted to use up every bit. Even burnt or chipped pieces had a second life. This glaze made even the most basic cake feel festive and fun. It was part treat, part thrift, and all heart. Grocery stores never taught people how to repurpose old sweets because selling more was the goal. But back then, no sugar went to waste. This glaze was not just about saving money. It was about making joy stretch a little further. Poking salad dressing in a washed-out ketchup bottle might sound like a stretch, but to a 1950s housewife, it was second nature. Once the bottle was empty, she would rinse it with hot water, add oil, vinegar, mustard, salt, sugar, and whatever herbs she had on hand. Then she would shake it up. No blender, no mess, just good old-fashioned elbow grease. That ketchup bottle became a reliable dressing shaker, ready whenever needed. It poured easily, stored well in the fridge, and cost nothing extra. You did not need to buy fancy bottles or mixers. You already had what you needed. It was clever, resourceful, and oddly satisfying. This trick came from the same spirit that saved string in a jar or foil in a drawer. Waste nothing. Use everything. Even if the bottle was glass, it still did its job. Housewives loved having control over their ingredients, especially with young kids at the table. No artificial flavors, just what they made themselves. Today we chase clean eating and low-waste trends. But back then, those ideas just meant doing things the smart way. And sometimes that meant turning trash into treasure with nothing more than a good shake. Making fruit butter from overripe fruit was a smart way to turn imperfect or aging fruit into a delicious and long-lasting spread. Instead of letting fruit go to waste, Wartime cooks slowly cooked down overripe apples, peaches, or pears with just a small amount of sugar to create a thick, flavorful butter. The low sugar content was intentional, as sugar was rationed and often in short supply, so cooks had to find ways to sweeten food without using much of it. This spread could be used on bread, served with biscuits, or added to breakfast dishes, giving meals extra flavor and variety. The process also helped preserve the fruit for longer periods, making it a practical pantry staple. Families often experimented with whatever fruit was on hand, and the resulting fruit butters became a cherished way to stretch food supplies while still enjoying sweet flavors. Making fruit butter was a testament to the creativity in wartime kitchens, turning potential waste into something nourishing and tasty. This tradition carries on in many homes today, keeping the spirit of resourcefulness alive. Making frosted glass jars to store leftovers was a clever way to keep food fresher longer using everyday kitchen supplies. Before airtight plastic containers became commonplace, Betty Crocker's guide suggested frosting glass jars with a layer of wax paper or parchment on the inside to create a moisture barrier. This helped prevent leftover foods from drying out or absorbing unwanted odors in the fridge. The slightly frosted surface also reduced condensation buildup, which was a major cause of early spoilage in cold storage. This method was especially popular during wartime rationing and the Depression, when stretching meals and saving leftovers was critical. Housewives took pride in preserving food quality as long as possible, and this little trick gave their meals a second life without needing special containers. Today, with plastic everywhere, this elegant and eco-friendly solution is often overlooked. Bringing it back not only saves money but also adds a nostalgic charm to food storage. The cold water hard boil test was a simple piece of advice that saved countless eggs from cracking or turning rubbery. Old guides explained that instead of dropping cold eggs into boiling water, you should start them off in a pot of cool water. As the temperature rose gradually, the shells stayed intact and the texture of the egg turned out more tender. Once they boiled, you could cool them quickly in cold water to loosen the shell, making them easier to peel. This was especially helpful in kitchens where eggs were a prized ingredient and could not be wasted. Peeling a hard-boiled egg without tearing half of it away felt like victory in itself. Cookbooks encouraged this method not only for practicality, but because it gave consistent results every time. Families learned to trust it for picnics, lunches, and salads where hard-boiled eggs were a mainstay. It was one of those little lessons passed quietly through generations, proving that the simplest changes could make everyday cooking smoother. Boiling cake ingredients together before baking might sound strange now, but it was a kitchen standard back then, especially for spice cakes. You would melt sugar, butter, water, and your spices in a pot until it turned into a thick, fragrant syrup. Then you poured it over flour, added eggs or soda, and baked it. The result? A moist, deeply flavored cake that tasted like it had taken all day, even though it had not. This method saved time, used fewer bowls, and brought out warm notes of cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove. During War and Depression years, when ovens were temperamental and butter was scarce, this kind of cake delivered real joy from very little. There was no need for layers, frostings, or fancy decorations. These were sturdy, honest cakes that sat proudly on the counter and stayed moist for days. Grocery stores eventually sold cake mixes as a shortcut, but this method already was one. It just did not come in a box. It came from memory, muscle, and a saucepan, something supermarkets could never quite package. Powdered milk to bulk up regular milk was not glamorous, but it sure was dependable. In big families with small budgets, milk disappeared fast, so housewives made it stretch by mixing whole milk with reconstituted powdered milk. You took a scoop of the powder, stirred it with water, and poured it into the fresh stuff to double the supply. It was not just thrift, it was survival. This trick made sure every child got a glass at breakfast, every recipe had enough for batter, and every cup of coffee got its splash of creaminess. Did it taste different? A little, but after a while no one noticed. It became part of the routine. When you have mouths to feed and only so much to go around, a full jug matters more than the taste of a second pour. Powdered milk also stored longer and did not require refrigeration until mixed. That made it perfect for backup in a pinch. Housewives kept boxes in the pantry like it was gold dust. And truth be told, it kinda was. It gave a little more breathing room to a grocery bill that was already tight. Fermenting vegetables for flavor and preservation was a critical wartime kitchen trick that helped families avoid store scarcity and add zest to their meals. Home fermentation produced staples like sauerkraut and pickles, which not only lasted longer without refrigeration, but also provided essential vitamins during times when fresh produce was limited. The fermentation process enhanced the flavor and digestibility of vegetables, turning simple cabbage or cucumbers into tangy, nutritious accompaniments. Many families set up fermentation crocks or jars to make batches that could be consumed over months. This preservation method allowed people to enjoy variety in their diet and helped prevent nutritional deficiencies. Fermented foods became a common sight on wartime tables, especially in immigrant communities that brought traditional recipes and techniques from Europe. This trick was inexpensive and sustainable, making it an indispensable part of wartime food culture. Fermentation also fostered a sense of self-sufficiency and was a source of pride for home cooks who could turn humble ingredients into delicious and healthy foods. Wrapping butter in wax paper for easier spreading was a practical tip that made cold butter easier to work with before the age of microwaves. Betty Crocker taught that wrapping sticks or blocks of butter tightly in wax paper and storing them in the fridge made the butter softer and easier to slice or spread directly on bread. The wax paper prevented the butter from absorbing unwanted fridge smells and also made it easy to unwrap small amounts without messy fingers. This was an important daily convenience for home cooks, especially when refrigeration was colder and butter was firmer than today. The tip helped keep butter fresh and ready for use while avoiding waste or spoilage. In modern kitchens, butter is often softened on the counter or melted, but this classic wrapping method remains an elegant solution for maintaining butter's best texture and flavor. Using scrambled eggs with vinegar might sound unusual now, but in older kitchens, it was a trusted way to keep the dish light and tender. A splash of vinegar whisked into the eggs before cooking changed their texture in subtle but important ways. Instead of turning rubbery, the eggs stayed soft and fluffy, almost custard-like. For families working with powdered or older eggs during rationing, this was a trick that made breakfast far more enjoyable. Cookbooks praised it as a foolproof method that elevated even the plainest meal. Vinegar was cheap and readily available, which made it the perfect partner for eggs when butter or cream was scarce. The taste did not linger strongly if used sparingly, and the result impressed even skeptical eaters. It was one of those small lessons about resourcefulness that could mean the difference between a forgettable plate and a memorable one. Generations later, it remains a clever example of how science and necessity came together in everyday cooking. When cereal went stale or no one wanted the crumbs at the bottom of the box, old cooks had a better plan. They baked with it. Cornflakes, bran flakes, even puffed rice were crushed and mixed into muffins, meatloaf, and casseroles. The cereal added texture, absorbed flavor, and helped stretch the main ingredients. In a meatloaf, it soaked up fat and gave it body. In muffins, it acted like flour, turning leftovers into something golden and crisp around the edges. Nothing got tossed. Every scrap had a second life, especially if it saved a little money on flour or breadcrumbs. Grocery stores never advertised this trick because using what you already had meant you were not buying more. But mothers and grandmothers knew better. They turned stale cereal into something warm and filling. You might not even notice it was there, and that was the point. This was cooking with your eyes open and your pantry nearly empty. No fancy boxes, no artificial flavors, just quiet thrift baked right into dinner. Turning leftover oatmeal into muffins was a quiet revolution in the breakfast routine. Cold, sticky oatmeal from the morning pot often sat lonely on the stove. But 1950s housewives had no intention of throwing it out. Instead, they folded it into muffin batter with flour, sugar, eggs, and whatever fruit or spices were on hand. The result was moist, dense muffins that filled the kitchen with warmth. You could add raisins, apples, cinnamon, even nuts if you had some. No one at the table guessed it was yesterday's porridge. It became a treat, not a chore. and it stretched one meal into another with hardly any effort. The texture was satisfying, the flavor comforting, and the savings unspoken but deeply felt. Frugality met creativity here. Housewives did not just save food, they remade it. These muffins were humble but reliable. They showed up in lunchboxes, picnic baskets, and church bake sales. And each one carried the quiet message that nothing in this house gets wasted, not even cold oatmeal. Using mayonnaise in cakes for moisture without butter was a surprising ingredient swap that kept cakes tender in ration or budget-conscious homes. During times when butter was expensive or scarce, Betty Crocker revealed that mayonnaise could replace butter or oil to maintain moistness and richness in baked goods. Since mayonnaise is mostly oil and eggs, it adds moisture and binding qualities that keep cakes soft without altering the flavor. This trick was a game changer for families struggling with limited ingredients but still wanting homemade treats. It was widely accepted because it used what was often on hand in the pantry, reducing waste and expense. The secret to success was not to overdo it, but to substitute carefully, following trusted recipes. Modern bakers who rediscover this hack can enjoy lighter, moist cakes without the saturated fat of butter. This forgotten method reminds us that everyday ingredients can have multiple clever uses. Egg yolk paint for cookies was a beloved tradition in old households where presentation mattered just as much as taste. Instead of buying fancy icings or expensive decorations, thrifty homemakers turned to the bright richness of yolks. Mixed with food coloring, they became an edible paint that could be brushed onto sugar cookies before baking. Once out of the oven, the cookies had a shiny, jewel-like finish that looked festive and cheerful. This hack appeared often in cookbooks around the holidays, giving families a way to make celebrations feel special even when resources were tight. Children especially loved helping, choosing colors, and brushing designs onto cookies that felt like their own creations. The egg yolk paint made plain treats sparkle without costing more than a single egg. It was resourceful, creative, and endlessly adaptable, a way to bring joy into kitchens that otherwise worked with limits. For many, these bright cookies became cherished memories, proof that even in hard times, beauty could still find a place on the table. Back before you could buy gravy in a packet or roux in a jar, you had to make it from scratch. That meant browning your own flour. You would pour it into a dry skillet and stir it over medium heat until it turned golden brown, releasing a nutty aroma that meant flavor was on its way. It took time and a bit of practice not to burn it, but the payoff was real. Once cooled, it could be stored in a jar and used to thicken stews, gravies, or creamy casseroles on the fly. This little bit of prep ahead of time made everyday cooking quicker, especially when you had hungry mouths and only 30 minutes to get dinner on the table. Browning flour added richness to even the simplest dishes. No meat? No problem. With a few vegetables and some browned flour, you could still get something satisfying. It is the kind of trick that gives a plain pot of food that slow-cooked flavor without hours of work. But it has faded from our kitchens, probably because supermarkets do not sell it pre-browned. Funny how that works, right? Ice cube trays were more than just for ice. In the 1950s, housewives used them to portion and preserve homemade broth, leftover gravy, or any bit of soup that seemed too good to toss. Once frozen, those little cubes of flavor could be popped into a pot weeks later to bring life back into a stew, casserole, or skillet of vegetables. Chicken stock from a roast dinner? Poured it in. Leftover beef drippings mixed with water? Froze it too. This trick was both practical and brilliant. It kept meals from tasting bland and helped stretch flavor when seasonings were in short supply. Plus, it was a way to avoid spoilage without relying on bulky storage or wasting fridge space. Ice cube trays were cheap, easy to clean, and always handy. You knew you were doing things right when your freezer had a few trays filled with amber or golden broth. It made midweek cooking faster and tastier. Modern kitchens have gadgets for everything, but back then, a simple metal tray turned scraps into meal starters. Clever and quiet, this trick turned tiny cubes into powerful bursts of comfort and helped every meal feel just a bit more homemade. Making flavored butter by mixing in kitchen herbs and spices was a quick upgrade for everyday meals in classic home cooking. Betty Crocker encouraged adding finely chopped herbs like parsley, chives, or dill, along with spices such as garlic or paprika, directly into softened butter. This infused the butter with fresh, vibrant tastes that could enhance bread, vegetables, or meats without needing elaborate sauces. It was an easy way to elevate simple meals, especially when fresh herbs were abundant in victory gardens or on windowsills. This homemade flavored butter became a signature of mid-century kitchens where cooks sought to make ordinary foods feel special with minimal effort. The practice also helped reduce reliance on costly or time-consuming condiments by using what was on hand. Today, flavored butters are seen as gourmet treats, but their roots lie in the practical and inventive cooking habits taught by Betty Crocker. Milk and egg emergency bread was a lifesaver for families when yeast was scarce or time was short. The recipe appeared in countless old cookbooks, always billed as quick, simple, and reliable. Instead of waiting for dough to rise, you whisked together milk, eggs, flour, and a little baking powder to make a batter. The eggs worked as the binder, holding everything together while adding richness to the loaf. Within minutes, you had a bread substitute that could be baked in a pan or cooked on a griddle. It was not as fluffy as traditional bread, but it filled stomachs and stretched ingredients further. During wartime rationing, this kind of recipe was invaluable, providing families with something hearty without relying on expensive yeast or long hours. Emergency bread was often paired with soup or stew, making it go even further. Families took comfort in its simplicity, knowing they could always whip it up with basic staples. For many, it was the taste of resilience, proof that no matter the shortages, there was always a way to put bread on the table. Before lemon juice became the go-to, vinegar was the silent hero in every kitchen. A quick dip in diluted vinegar water could keep apple slices, pear wedges, or even peeled potatoes from browning too fast. This was especially handy when prepping ahead of time or packing lunch for school and work. The acid slowed down the oxidation process and bought you a few extra hours of freshness without needing plastic wrap or chemical sprays. For households that only had one apple left for the kids, this trick was worth its weight in gold. It made every bit stretch a little further, taste a little better, and last a little longer. Plus, vinegar was cheaper, more common, and already used for dozens of other kitchen needs: cleaning, pickling, preserving. Grocery stores do not want you to know that a bottle of vinegar can outdo half their produce-saving products. But this tiny trick gave families an edge, especially when the fruit bowl was running low and every slice had to count. It was not just thrifty, it was smart. And it is exactly the kind of thing we should be teaching again. Crushing stale cake into dessert crumbs was the final act of rescue in a house where nothing went to waste. When a cake dried out or sat too long on the counter, housewives did not toss it in the trash. They broke it up by hand or used a rolling pin to crush it into fine crumbs. Those crumbs had plenty of uses. You could press them into a pie crust with butter and sugar, sprinkle them over puddings, or layer them into trifles. Some folks even used them as coating for fried treats or folded them into new batter. It was sweet, crumbly insurance that dessert was never far away. Cake might have gone stale, but the love behind it had not. Housewives saw these bits as building blocks, not trash. A stale dessert became the start of another. That was the magic of mid-century homemaking. You found ways to keep flavor alive. Even in the smallest scraps, there was purpose. A pantry full of ideas meant a family full of surprises. No one ever guessed that the pie crust had once been a birthday cake. And that was the point. Using toothpicks to test cake doneness without drying was a delicate method to check baking progress without damaging texture. Instead of inserting a knife or fork that might remove too much batter or leave large holes, Betty Crocker's recipes often suggested using a clean toothpick to poke the cake lightly. If it came out clean or with a few moist crumbs, the cake was done. If batter stuck to it, more time was needed. This simple tool avoided disturbing the cake's surface and ensured even cooking. It was a practical hack that home bakers swore by to avoid underbaked or overbaked results. Though easy, this test required gentle hands and attention to detail, embodying the care classic cooking demanded. Modern bakers still use toothpicks, but many forget its original intent as a precision instrument rather than a quick poke. Eggshells to brighten whites in laundry might sound far-fetched today, but older homemaking guides swore by it. The hack involved crushing clean shells, placing them in a small cloth bag, and tossing it into the wash with linens. The calcium was said to act as a mild whitening agent, helping keep sheets and shirts bright without expensive detergents. In a time when store-bought soap powders were considered luxuries, families turned to creative alternatives like this. Cookbooks and housekeeping manuals presented it as one of many multi-purpose uses for eggshells, ensuring nothing went to waste. Housewives felt proud of making laundry look crisp and fresh with nothing more than what was left from breakfast. It was also seen as gentler on fabric than harsher chemical options, preserving clothes that had to last longer. Whether or not it was as effective as promised, the belief in its usefulness showed how far thrift could go. It was another example of resourcefulness, where even something as fragile as a shell found new purpose in the home. When a block of cheese was almost gone, you did not throw out the rind. You saved it, because that tough edge held the last of the flavor. Hard cheeses like Parmesan or aged cheddar were expensive, and families learned to use every last bit. The rind was dropped into bubbling soup pots or saucepans, where it would slowly soften and melt just enough to release its salty richness. You did not need meat or bones when a single cheese rind could transform a pot of beans or a simple tomato broth. It was thrift that tasted like luxury, and once the rind gave all it could, you fished it out and tossed it, nothing left to offer. Today, cheese rinds get sliced off and tossed in the trash without a second thought, but back then, it was understood that flavor lived in every part of the food. This was one of those quiet tricks that stretched your pantry and made meals feel richer than they were. Supermarkets do not remind you of this one, maybe because it means fewer blocks of cheese in your cart. Refrigerator pickling with vinegar and sugar was how housewives brought a little brightness into their meals without a full day of canning. You sliced cucumbers, onions, or even green beans, poured over a hot mix of vinegar, sugar, and spices, then sealed the jar and let it chill. No boiling water baths, no pressure cookers, just patience and a fridge shelf. In a day or two, you had sweet, tangy pickles that added snap and flavor to otherwise plain meals. They stayed crisp, looked colorful, and made sandwiches or roasts feel like something special. Best of all, it gave you control. You adjusted the sweetness, spiced it your way, and worked with whatever was in season. Refrigerator pickling felt homemade, but also modern. It was fast enough for weeknight dinners, but classic enough to impress guests. This trick helped housewives stay ahead, turning garden extras or produce drawer stragglers into little jars of joy. In a world where nothing was wasted, pickling meant preservation, not just taste. And every time you opened the fridge to that tangy scent, it felt like a little reward for doing things the smart way. Storing onions wrapped in newspaper to extend shelf life was a practical pantry trick widely used before the advent of modern refrigeration. Home cooks would wrap individual onions or whole bunches in sheets of newspaper and store them in a cool, dry, and dark place such as a cellar, pantry, or basement. The newspaper absorbed excess moisture and helped protect the onions from light exposure, which could cause premature sprouting or spoilage. This simple technique helped maintain onion firmness and flavor for several weeks or even months, making it an essential preservation method during times of rationing and economic hardship. Betty Crocker cookbooks and household guides recommended this inexpensive and easy method to reduce food waste and stretch precious supplies. The practice was especially important when refrigeration was not widespread, and families had to rely on natural storage methods to keep vegetables fresh. Although less common today due to modern refrigerators and mesh bags, wrapping onions in newspaper remains an effective, eco-friendly storage tip. It also connects us to vintage kitchen habits and reminds us of the resourcefulness required in classic home cooking. Mock noodles with egg ribbons were one of the more ingenious wartime inventions to make meals feel complete when flour was in short supply. Instead of rolling dough, beaten eggs were poured in a thin stream into simmering broth, cooking instantly into delicate ribbons that resembled noodles. Families could then enjoy a filling soup that looked like it had pasta without using up scarce rations. Cookbooks encouraged this trick because it gave the comfort of a noodle dish while relying on ingredients that were easier to find. Children loved watching the ribbons form, and homemakers appreciated how quickly the recipe came together. Sometimes herbs or scraps of vegetables were added to the broth for extra flavor, but the star was always the soft, golden strands of egg. It was a resourceful way of turning what you had into what you wanted, bridging the gap between scarcity and satisfaction. This dish became a memory tied to perseverance, proving that even a pot of broth could be transformed with nothing more than a few eggs and a steady hand. Cleaning cast iron used to be a lesson passed from one generation to the next, and salt was the teacher. No soap, no scouring pads, just coarse salt and a towel. You poured salt into the warm pan and used it like a scrubber, rubbing away the cooked-on bits without removing the seasoning. It left the skillet smooth, clean, and ready for tomorrow's meal. This method kept the pan's hard-earned coating intact, something that took weeks or months to build. Every cook had their own cast iron rules, but salt was nearly universal. It worked, it was cheap, and it was better than anything sold in stores. Today, entire aisles are filled with specialty cleaning products, but this trick came from a time when kitchens relied on know-how, not chemicals. Supermarkets would rather sell you a $10 bottle than remind you that a handful of salt will do the same job. But this was cooking rooted in care, preserving your tools the same way you preserved your food. And that skillet? It just kept getting better with age. Boiling bones for soup broth was an act of transformation, taking scraps and turning them into something nourishing and deeply flavorful. A leftover chicken carcass, beef knuckles, pork ribs, nothing went to waste. Housewives would toss the bones into a pot with onion ends, carrot tops, and peppercorns, then let it simmer low and slow. Hours later, they had a rich stock ready to be the base for a dozen different meals. No cartons, no cubes, just the honest flavor of what was left behind. It made soups heartier, gravies deeper, and even plain rice a little more special. Bones were not trash. They were the beginning of something. Housewives understood that a good broth meant tomorrow's dinner was halfway done. This was not just thrift, it was skill. Broth making was a quiet background job in the rhythm of home life. You did it while the laundry dried or while you wiped the table. It filled the house with comfort before anyone took a bite. Using a cold water soak to reduce salt in cured meats was an old trick to rescue too salty leftovers and make them more enjoyable. If bacon, ham, or salted pork had been over-cured or stored too long, home cooks would soak the slices in cold water for several hours or overnight. This process helped draw out excess salt, mellowing the flavor without sacrificing the meat's texture or usefulness. Betty Crocker's guides promoted this method as a cost-saving measure that allowed families to stretch their food supply and avoid waste. It was especially helpful in eras when purchasing fresh meat was a challenge or expensive. This soaking trick balanced strong saltiness while maintaining the rich flavor characteristic of cured meats. Today, many have forgotten this straightforward fix, but it remains a practical solution for those dealing with saltier than desired products. Emergency frosting with egg whites was a lifesaver for homemakers who wanted to serve something sweet but did not have butter on hand. The recipe called for whipping egg whites with hot sugar syrup until the mixture turned into a fluffy, glossy topping. It spread easily over cakes and cookies, transforming even plain bakes into special treats. Old cookbooks promoted it as both thrifty and dependable, since eggs were often easier to find than butter during rationing. Families loved the way it looked, tall and cloud-like, giving desserts a celebratory feel even in tough times. Children especially delighted in the frosting, which felt indulgent despite its humble ingredients. It was also forgiving, able to cover uneven cakes or stretch a small amount of batter into something that seemed grander. Emergency frosting was proof that sweetness did not need extravagance, only creativity. It became a staple in households that prized resourcefulness, reminding everyone that joy could still be whipped up from the simplest things. Using sweetened condensed milk as frosting was not just clever, it was kind of brilliant. Back when butter was rationed or too expensive, the sticky canned milk offered a sweet and creamy shortcut that worked on cakes, cookies, and even quick breads. You could thin it with a little lemon juice, cocoa powder, or vanilla and whip it until smooth. It was pourable, spreadable, and needed no refrigeration. Best of all, it tasted rich and indulgent without needing butter or powdered sugar. Some versions even used peanut butter or crushed fruit mixed in. Kids loved it, and mothers appreciated how far one could go. It was frosting without the fuss, and it made homemade cakes feel like something special. Grocery stores would eventually fill their shelves with canned frostings, but this trick came first. It was taught in kitchens where you made do, got creative, and still pulled off dessert. No mixers, no frills. Just a can, a spoon, and a little faith in the process. Saving butter wrappers for greasing pans was one of the quietest and cleverest habits in a 1950s kitchen. After using a stick of butter, a housewife would fold the wrapper neatly and store it in the fridge or freezer. When it came time to bake, she would pull it out and use the residue to coat cake tins, cookie sheets, or muffin trays. It gave just enough grease to keep things from sticking, no mess, no waste, and no need for extra butter. You were not wasting a thing. That small swipe of leftover fat did more than you would expect. It smelled like something was about to be baked, even before the oven warmed up. Housewives passed this trick down without thinking, and their daughters folded the wrappers just the same. It was a small act of thrift, but it came from a bigger mindset. Waste nothing, use everything. Even paper soaked in butter had a second life. In homes where every bit counted, even the wrapper had a job to do, and it did it well. Creating mock mayonnaise with egg yolk and vinegar was a wartime-era hack that helped households cope when commercial mayonnaise was scarce or rationed. This clever substitute involved whisking egg yolks with vinegar, oil, and seasonings to mimic the creamy texture and tang of real mayonnaise. Betty Crocker's cookbooks offered this recipe as an affordable and easy alternative that required only basic pantry ingredients. The mock mayo kept salads, sandwiches, and dressings flavorful during tough economic times and supply shortages. It was particularly useful when fresh eggs and vinegar were more available than processed condiments. This homemade version might not have had the exact consistency of store-bought mayo, but it delivered the essential taste and moisture needed in classic recipes. Today, recreating this old-fashioned substitute can connect modern cooks to a resourceful culinary tradition that made simple ingredients stretch farther while keeping meals delicious and familiar. Baked egg in a tomato cup was a thrifty main dish that made use of two humble staples in a clever way. The method was simple: hollow out a tomato, crack an egg inside, and bake until set. Old cookbooks suggested it as an easy, nutritious supper that felt hearty without needing meat. Tomatoes were often grown in victory gardens, making them readily available, while eggs were one of the most versatile proteins at hand. The combination created a dish that was filling, colorful, and surprisingly elegant. It was often seasoned with salt, pepper, or herbs when available, but even plain it provided comfort. Families appreciated that it could be made with minimal effort and that leftovers from the garden never went to waste. Children often remembered this as one of the more cheerful meals, its bright red shell standing out on the plate. It was yet another example of how old cookbooks taught people to turn what they had into something special, making resourcefulness taste just as good as abundance. Drying bread in the oven for dressing was the kind of slow step that made fast meals possible later. You took old slices, cubed them up, and spread them on a tray to bake low and slow until they were dry to the touch. No oil, no seasoning, just time and heat. These bread cubes would go into jars or tins and wait patiently until needed. On busy nights or holidays, they were pulled out, mixed with broth and herbs, and baked into stuffing or used to stretch meatloaf. You did not need a box mix or plastic bag, just your own stale bread, carefully dried and saved. It made every scrap feel like it had a purpose. This trick was about thinking ahead, and it helped families cook bigger, heartier meals without spending extra. Grocery stores later packaged stuffing mix in shiny bags and labeled it convenient. But the original version sat on pantry shelves long before that. Homemade, quiet, and just as good. Using dish towels to proof bread was a trick rooted in simplicity and trust. Before plastic wrap and modern proofing boxes, 1950s housewives would set their bread dough in a bowl, cover it with a clean kitchen towel, and find the warmest corner of the kitchen. The towel kept the dough safe from drafts, dust, and drying out. It also breathed, allowing the yeast to rise properly without trapping too much moisture. You could fold it gently over the bowl and check back an hour later to see the magic happen. Proofing bread was never about high-tech tools. It was about warmth, patience, and rhythm. The dish towel was part of that ritual. Every good baking day began with the smell of yeast and a soft cotton cloth ready to cover the future loaf. Housewives had a feel for timing that no machine could match. They watched dough rise like it was an old friend returning home. And the towel was more than fabric. It was a part of the process, passed down through habit and handed across generations. Keeping brown sugar soft with a terracotta disc was a clever and reusable kitchen tool from the mid-century era that many homemakers relied on to prevent hardened sugar lumps. The small terracotta piece, often shaped like a flat disc or charm, was soaked briefly in water and then placed inside the container with brown sugar. The porous material slowly released moisture, keeping the sugar soft and easy to scoop without affecting the flavor. This simple trick saved time and frustration for home cooks who otherwise had to break up clumps or replace hardened sugar. It was especially handy during times when wasting any ingredient was out of the question. The terracotta disc became a beloved kitchen companion, often passed down through generations. Though rarely used today, rediscovering this method can help reduce waste and save money while adding a touch of vintage charm to your pantry. Eggs baked in creamed spinach was a resourceful supper dish that turned leftovers into something new and satisfying. When vegetables like spinach were cooked down with cream or milk, they became the perfect bed for eggs. By cracking them on top and baking until set, families created a protein-rich meal with minimal effort. Old cookbooks recommended it as an answer to using up scraps without serving the same thing twice. The eggs added substance and nutrition while the spinach stretched the dish to feed more mouths. It was simple, hearty, and adaptable, making it popular in households that valued efficiency. A sprinkle of breadcrumbs or cheese, when available, gave the dish extra flavor. What made it clever was not only the taste, but also the practicality. One pan, a few ingredients, and dinner was ready. Families looked at dishes like this as proof that a little imagination could go a long way. It was resourcefulness baked right into the meal, and for many, it became a dependable comfort during hard times. Baking whole cloves in a dish inside the oven did more than scent the kitchen. It calmed the whole house. You did not need candles or sprays, just a few tablespoons of cloves, sometimes mixed with cinnamon sticks or orange peels, placed in an oven-safe dish and warmed on low heat. As the oven warmed the spices, the aroma would drift into every corner. It was rich, warm, and far more comforting than anything store-bought. This trick was often used before company came over, during the holidays, or just to lift a heavy mood. For families living through lean times, scent mattered more than people think. It made a plain house feel full, even when the pantry was not. And it masked the smell of stronger meals like cabbage, salt pork, or liver. Supermarkets now sell air fresheners that try to imitate this very thing, but they miss the warmth. Back then, a good-smelling house came from what you cooked, not what you sprayed. Using cookie cutters for sandwich appeal was a trick every clever 1950s housewife kept in her back pocket. Lunches could be plain, but they did not have to look it. With just a press of a cutter, a square slice of bread turned into a star, a heart, or a teddy bear. Suddenly, that same old peanut butter and jelly became a little surprise tucked into a lunchbox. It was not just for kids either. Bridal showers, garden teas, and baby luncheons all saw trays of shaped finger sandwiches stacked just so. Even ham on white looked fancier when cut into circles and layered like petals. This trick was all about charm without extra cost. You used what you had and added care. It gave lunch a little lift, and for children in school or husbands at work, that small delight meant something. Housewives knew food was about more than hunger. It was about comfort, joy, and effort. A cookie cutter was not just a baking tool. It was a reminder that home cooking came from the heart, right down to the edges of the crust. Using a cheese grater to shred cold butter for pastry dough was an old-fashioned hack for quick, flaky pie crusts. Instead of softening butter until spreadable, Betty Crocker advised grating cold butter directly into the flour, creating small, evenly distributed pieces that helped produce a tender and crumbly texture. This saved time and avoided melting the butter too much, which could ruin the delicate layers of pastry. It was especially useful in an era before stand mixers or food processors, giving home cooks an easy way to achieve professional results by hand. The grated butter mixed easily with flour, trapping air and moisture during baking to create flakiness. Though less common today with modern equipment, this technique remains a charming and effective method for those who prefer hands-on baking. It embodies the practical ingenuity Betty Crocker was famous for teaching. The 2-minute egg sandwich filler was a thrifty solution for busy families needing a quick lunch. All it required was mashing boiled eggs with relish, mustard, or even a little mayonnaise when available. The result was a spread that stretched a small amount of protein into several sandwiches. Cookbooks promoted it as an ideal school lunch because it was inexpensive, portable, and filling. It also gave homemakers flexibility, since the flavor could be adjusted depending on what was in the pantry. During rationing, when meat was scarce, egg sandwich filler became a substitute that still offered nutrition. It was also popular for picnics, since it could be prepared in minutes with no fuss. Children grew up with it as a familiar taste of comfort, while adults appreciated its economy. Recipes often encouraged adding chopped vegetables or herbs to bulk it up further, showing how far creativity could stretch an egg. For many families, this was not just a sandwich filler, but a dependable standby that brought relief to the kitchen table day after day. Stretching ground beef with rolled oats was not just frugal, it was necessary. Meat was pricey and often rationed, but families still needed protein on the plate. Instead of using a full pound of beef for meatloaf or burgers, housewives would mix in rolled oats. They soaked up flavor, added texture, and held the mixture together like a charm. You would never guess there was less meat. And if you seasoned it well, with onion, garlic, or even ketchup, it tasted like the full thing. Some even preferred it that way. It was healthier, heartier, and cheaper. This trick helped feed more mouths without sacrificing quality. You could get 6 burgers out of a half pound of beef if you did it right. Housewives took pride in that. It was not about cutting corners. It was about making smart use of what you had. And in a time when every meal was cooked from scratch, that kind of ingenuity was respected. It made dinner stretch further, and everyone left the table full. Today we might call it a budget recipe. Back then, it was just how things were done, quietly clever and always thoughtful. Reviving wilted lettuce with a saltwater soak was an economical freshness hack used before the convenience of plastic packaging extended produce shelf life. When lettuce or leafy greens became limp or slightly wilted, home cooks would immerse the leaves in a bowl of cold salted water for several minutes. The salt helped draw moisture into the leaves, restoring crispness and firmness. This trick was widely taught in vintage cookbooks and household guides, helping families stretch the life of their fresh vegetables and reduce waste. The simple soak not only perked up salads, but also improved the texture and taste of cooked greens. It was a practical solution when fresh produce was more precious and less readily available than today. Rediscovering this soak method offers a natural and budget-friendly way to make greens more appealing and last longer. Which forgotten cooking trick would save you the most money today? Drop your kitchen secrets in the comments below, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss more money-saving wisdom from generations past.